Hello again and welcome to the scaffolding of 67 Arran Street East, where we've been making good progress over the past couple of weeks. And one of the tricky problems we've had up here at first floor level is these two sash windows. And because of the level of the movement in the brickwork over the years, both sash box frames were no longer centered on the window reveals as was originally the case. And one of them is still boarded up over here, which we'll show you. And you can see that the timber frame is now sunk right in behind the brick reveal, where originally it would have been projecting out by about that depth on one side, whereas on the other side it's projecting far too much, so due to the level of brick movement over the years. And then in the case of the middle window, there's the added problem that the whole window was actually tilting back into the room, the whole sash box frame. So there was a huge gap here, and there was tapering down into a pizza wedge down at the bottom. So our two contractors are here today. Lamb's Tongue, our joiners, and Nolan's our main contractor. And they're working hand in hand now to, as you can see, number one, to take out the sash boxes. And we've had the luxury that we don't have full shutter boxes inside, so we were able to do that without too much disruption to the original decorative fabric. And then to get a clean access in order to remove the snots on the back of the reveals and to get a nice tight joint up against the brick. And you can see that to even better effect here, where Rob in Lamb's Tongue has just after demounting the original sash box. And you can see, of course, how these were put together with the pulley wheel and then the pocket for the cords and for the weights on the sides. And in the process has also revealed the window head directly above. And you can see that, in fact, I should say heads really, because it's made up of two pieces of timber. And they look fairly slight, but in fact they're very substantial in depth, in height, I suppose. They're over 5 inches tall, so they're doing a good job in holding up the upper facade. And you can see the original coved plaster cornice there as well, which is typical of the mid-18th century. And then, so these are the masonry pockets, and you can see the snots of mortar that now need to be tidied up so we can get a nice tight joint up against the outer reveal. And it's also exposed some archaeology here as well. We'd long suspected that these windows were originally much grander in how they presented to the room here on the first floor. And sure enough, we can make out where the original pedestal bases projected right out into the room, like chunky classical bases on each side. The chair rail would have run around it, the chunky skirting underneath. There's a very nice moulded windowsill that we've just discovered that was buried in amongst all the 1960s hardboard. So all of that will enable us to reinstate these windows back to their original arrangement with full flush shutters, with perpendicular shutters, as would have been the case in the mid-18th century. And just to show you by comparison what these windows would have looked like with their lugged architraves, we have one surviving example in here on top of the stairs, and you can see the lugs at the top and the bottom. And even in this case, this window has been altered. We think probably in 1902 when the staircase here was installed. So we think originally these didn't have the splayed reveals, but in fact they would have been completely perpendicular with the window, with probably chunky raised and fielded shutters. So again, because this has been messed around with so many times, and also there's evidence of water having come in there at the top, and you can see there was structural alterations made here over the years, that we're going to demount the architraves in order to, number one, to inspect the window head above, secondly, to move the window, and then thirdly, to actually reassemble the architraves back to their original mid-18th century appearance based on the evidence that we're discovering here at the moment. And here are all of the carefully demounted pieces of joinery which have been stowed away to one side. And it's so important to do that when joinery is being demounted, that you keep track of where it is. And I suppose what's so unfortunate in the refurbishment of older buildings is that so many elements that look dirty and filthy and covered in dust are just casually dismissed. And yet the quality, number one, of the timber that's there, the originality of the fabric is so important. But also in this case, for example, the windowsill, which I just remounted here, you can see that lovely moulded a detail on the front which is typical of the mid-18th century, as is the chunkiness of this windowsill. So sills in the late 18th century would have been probably half the thickness of this. But one thing that we'd long suspected, of course, is that the windowsill projected out into the room on pedestal bases. And sure enough, this end piece, which was totally embedded, when we actually took it out, you can see that the whole piece is molded, that it actually returns on itself. So this was designed to be expressed in the room. So rather than embedded in the wall, it was actually projecting right out into the room with a full classical pedestal base underneath. So being careful and methodical and looking for that evidence and then retaining it and reusing it is a key part of the whole conservation process.